I thought that might
Rocky,
be.
nice to meet you, sir.
So nice to meet you.
Yeah.
There was a time when anyone from St. Louis would have instantly recognized Rocky Sickmann. But that was nearly 40 years ago, when he looked like this.
I never thought I would be part of history.
On November 4th, 1979, Rocky Sickmann was a young Marine sergeant guarding the U.S. Embassy in Tehran when a group of student protesters broke in and began taking hostages. The Iranians held 52 Americans captive for 444 days, and one of them was Rocky Sickmann.
You know, when you're held hostage, it's very boring.
To pass the time and remember the time, Sickmann kept a diary, hundreds of pages documenting the days that turned into 14 months of captivity. Now, almost 4 decades later, Rocky Sickmann's diary is one of the new items on display at St. Louis's Soldiers Memorial.
Stories like the Iran hostage crisis are those really powerful stories of service that take place between those major conflicts. We as historians naturally tend to focus on those larger stories, typically wars that involve many nations, as major touchstones as we explore our history. But just as important, the time in between those conflicts are the stories of service as well.
I'm so humbled and honored to be here.
A few weeks before Soldiers Memorial was reopened, Sickmann was given a preview of where and how his diary would be displayed.
Awesome.
And a chance to revisit his own anguished words written on scraps of paper that now even he must handle with caution.
Wow. I had smuggled it home, my thigh, in a plastic bag that when I presented it to you guys was still the same plastic bag that I had used when I wrapped it around my thigh in 1981.
Sickmann has loaned his entire diary to the museum, but it will be displayed only 2 pages at a time to minimize exposure to light.
They kept telling us, if you want a letter to get out, you have to put something derogatory. So they would bring us paper, and so that paper, knowing that I'm not going to write anything derogatory, I started at the very beginning with a typewriter. Well, at the very beginning, they realized I wasn't writing letters to send home. They took the typewriter, and then that continued with paper like this.
Rocky Sickmann's all-caps prose is a record mostly of the mundane, but occasionally the profound. The mental and physical torture experienced by the hostages is not something he chose to record in detail.
It's a very boring book, but it was a book for me. It was something that kept me alive. And for those that were to read it, it probably very difficult to read, hard to read, and probably put them to sleep.
There are complaints about the food, details about card games, exercise routines, and the nicknames he used to mock some of his captors. But on darker days, and there were plenty of them, Sickmann's words also give glimpses into the anguish and desolation of captivity so far away from his family in Krakow, Missouri.
1800 hours, January 8th, 1981, day 432. It seems too good to be true that we'll be getting out of here. Then again, I can't see myself staying here for the rest of my life either. God, please help us.
I'm sitting there thinking, if nobody remembered the Vietnam War, which was 1979, who's going to remember 65 people 10,000 miles away from the United States in a foreign country?
Well, 3 more days till Thanksgiving. So it looks like we won't be home this year either.
The latter part of the 444 days were probably the worst because you didn't want to live anymore. Being held hostage was like, people can relate to a car accident. It's a very traumatic time. I mean, the sounds and the smells and the cries and the screams. And so each one of those pages, each one of those dates signified a specific bad time. There were some good times, but you were still surrounded by the uncertainty of ever knowing if you were ever going to be released.
The planes bearing our prisoners left Iranian airspace and are now free of Iran.
The Iranians finally released the hostages on January 20th, 1981, just minutes after Ronald Reagan was sworn in as president. When Rocky Sickmann arrived in St. Louis a few days later, he was still unsure how much the public knew or cared about the hostages, until he saw this yellow banner attached to the control tower at St. Louis Lambert Airport.
They did a private flyby of the tower so that we could see. I mean, it was like, for me.
That banner is now part of the Rocky Sickmann display at Soldiers Memorial, along with this item he had never seen before.
This was a bracelet that someone wore as a daily remembrance of you and your colleagues that were held hostage.
Wow.
Rocky Sickmann would go on to marry the girl he dated long before he ever became famous. He would become a father and a grandfather, enjoy a long career as director of military sales for Anheuser-Busch, and become an active supporter of veterans' causes. For the most part, he tried to leave what happened to him in Iran.
Incredible things.
But 4 decades later, he remains unwilling to leave behind one particular memory: the failed rescue mission in 1980 that ended in the death of 8 U.S. servicemen. They are the soldiers Rocky Sickmann memorializes every day.
Freedom is not free, Paul. It's one of those things that every morning I wake up, 8 people lost their life trying to regain my freedom. That it's like the movie Saving Private Ryan. At the end of the movie, the guy says,
"Earn this." Earn it.
I want to make sure every morning I wake up, I earn my day of freedom for those 8 guys. They gave it their life so that I could come back. That American flag, it represents freedom, and we can't ever forget it.